Hi, folks, it's Ron. Hey, welcome back to another series of my residential network cabling series of videos I'm putting up. And this is going to be part 8, which is home theater design. Now, you know what? I'm not going to have a huge conversation here. And home theater design can be a huge topic if you really want to get into it, and can take days in courses. So, but what I'm going to try and impart to you is some basics. I think if anybody knew they could make any sound system and video system hopefully look better, and some basic tips of what to think about when you're designing that room, and getting equipment, and how do you hook it up with what type of cabling and that kind of good stuff, and kind of what to maybe look out for when you're dealing with all this kind of stuff, because we all like to have some version of a home theater, and you know what? You could spend a boatload of money here if you cared to, and I mean a boatload. If anybody ever gets you involved in a home theater, you almost got to ask them up front, what's the budget? Because you can spend every dime or whatever they're thinking of. And you know what? Whether you spend a little bit of money or a lot of money, whatever you have is better than what you had before, so you're happy with it, right? Now, whether it actually sounds like it's supposed to and looks like it's supposed to is a whole other subject. And you know, a lot of us have never really been exposed to what really good audio sounds like and what really good video actually looks like. And so you just don't know. And, you know, back when I was in 5th grade, I figured nobody could see. It wasn't until somebody realized I need glasses that, you know, and all of a sudden I go, oh, well, it does make a big difference. So you kind of don't know what you don't know, but we're also happy because what we have is better than what we had before. Now, we're going to kind of cover a little bit about the components that go into that, the cabling you might think about using, not speaker wire. We're talking about, you know, component, composite, HDMI, that kind of good stuff. And a little bit about room design when think about setting up this home theater, because that can make a big difference in how this thing's going to sound. And I thought all these websites down below here do a pretty good job explaining basic home theater. That last one, Imaging Science actually Foundation, is a great little organization. If you can ever sit down and actually take some of the training they offer, is very good. And it's not cheap, but it's good. And it's interesting when we look at the sound system we're going to install in a home theater. As a general rule, they'll tell you to put a little bit more money into the speakers you're going to put inside them walls than you are the other components, because those other components change over time, where the speakers are probably going to actually be there for quite a while. And you know, for instance, the Blu-ray is obviously taken over from the DVD player kind of thing. A good example. And you know, you could go out and buy yourself a high-end receiver and hook it up to a crap set of speakers, and it's obviously not going to sound great. But vice versa, if you take an okay receiver, hook it up to a nice set of speakers, it should sound pretty good. And so the speakers have a lot more to do with the quality of the sound necessarily than the receivers do. But obviously it's a combination of the two. But it's interesting that we'll put more money in speakers. Now, do you need to go big dollars here? And the answer to that is, I'm going to say not necessarily. I mean, can you? Oh, absolutely. You can spend big money here. And some people do nothing but spend, again, big money in home theaters, but don't necessarily have to. But whatever speaker you end up buying, make sure that if it's designed to be mounted in a wall, you mount it in a wall. And if it's designed to be mounted in a back box in that wall, then you mount it in a back box. If it's designed to be mounted outside of walls, then you mount it outside of walls. So you'll find that they engineer them for certain applications, so follow whatever that is with the speaker manufacturer you're dealing with. Okay? Now, the room and what's in the room is going to have a lot to do with how this thing's going to sound. And I know a lot of y'all have moved into an apartment and you know, hear that huge echo in the apartment. But when you fill it full of furniture, what happened to the echo? And obviously it gets absorbed by anything in the room. So you got to understand that the purpose of the home theater is to make you think you're part of the movie. That's the real purpose of this home theater. And to do that, we'd like to have a dedicated room. And that's why we like a dedicated room, not part of your living room or great room or whatever room it is. And so and a lot of times we'll base that room size based on screen size. And obviously on these higher-end home theater systems, these guys will put in, you know, 15, 20-foot screens. And that whole room is designed just, again, for that home theater. Now, how close are we supposed to be sitting to a TV today? And that's a good question. And, you know, the answer to that is they keep moving us closer. And, you know, back in year 2000, for instance, you know, 3 to 4 times the width of a screen is typically what you heard. And a few years later, it was 2 to 3 times the width of the screen. And nowadays, I hear people saying about 1.5 to 2 times the width of a screen. And you got to understand, what's the purpose of the home theater? Again, to make you think you're part of the movie. Well, one way of doing that is to fill your vision with the screen. So that's the reason we got you sitting pretty close to them today. And On top of that, the resolution in these TVs has gotten so darn good, you can walk right up to one and not see the little dots in them. So it's kind of close, okay? Now, you guys have, if you haven't heard, rectangular rooms are actually the best sounding rooms. Not L, not round, not, some other shape, okay? And so they're rectangles. So when you look at almost any home theater, they're going to be rectangular in shape. Even the big ones at the movie theaters are. And you got to understand that the sound is bouncing around this room and either being absorbed or reflected throughout the room. And so all sounds are waves. If you don't know this, it's like dropping a pebble in a pond. You get that rippling effect around the pebble. That's what the sound wave is like in a room. And so obviously a hard floor is going to reflect it, and a couch is going to absorb some. And as far as soundproofing rooms are concerned, and it's one of the key things in higher-end home theaters we try to do, is try to limit that sound into the theater, because these things can get pretty loud. And that can be a very expensive thing if you would really get into it. And you can do some basic things like put it in a solid core versus a hollow core door on the room, gasketing that door, doubling up on a sheetrock, and there's all kinds of sound absorption materials that can be had and done, and some tips to help maybe keep that sound in the room. But here are some things we can do that hopefully will make any room sound better and hopefully look better when you put in that home theater. Okay, now one of the things that we'll think about, and not always, but are what we call harmonics of the original sound. And as I said a minute ago, all sounds are bouncing through this room. So the first thing you hear from a speaker is that direct sound that comes right to you and hits your ears directly from the speaker. Now you also hear it as sound that bounces off the sidewall and deflected back into you as well. And that first reflection is referred to as the first order harmonic. Now, it can deflect off another wall, too, which would become the second harmonic before it hits your ears. And it can deflect off a third wall before it hits your ears again, too. So there's all orders of these different harmonics. And you get beyond the first order, you're kind of chasing at your tail a little bit, because most of us aren't going to worry beyond that. And a lot of us won't even begin to worry about this one. But if you did, one way of quickly kind of identifying where some of those problems potentially might be would be to sit in the chair and have a buddy walk down the length of that wall with a mirror in front of them, and they can actually, and when you're sitting in that chair and you can see that speaker you're concerned about in that mirror, right there along that wall would be a good place to think about putting a sound absorption material or a bookcase or something that might help diffuse that sound coming off that wall. But beyond that, again, we get into some crazy kind of things. And then when you look at the sound system we're going to install in it. Now, you guys have probably heard of 5-channel, 6-channel, 7-channel, 10.4, whatever the thing might be. You're going to understand that virtually all content today is 5.1. All DVDs are recorded that way. Now, you go beyond that to like Blu-ray, that gets us 6 and 7-channel options, but be aware that a lot of the content you're going to have is 5.1. And you know what? 5.1 is really fine for most applications. You get beyond that into 6 and 7-channel, hey, you got a little more money to blow. Maybe you got a bit bigger little home theater you're trying to deal with, and there might be reasons why you want to go do that, which is fine. Nothing wrong with spending more money if you want to. But 5-channel is a lot of it. And so when you look at these numbers, 5.1, 5 represents the number of surround speakers we're going to put in the room, and the 1 is the number of subwoofers. Now, you can put as many subwoofers as you want into the room, and we'll get into that in a minute or two, but let's look at the 5 surround speakers. Now, one of the first speakers we might mount in the room is what we refer to as the center channel speaker, and it should be mounted in the very front of the room, what we call dead on with the main listening position in that room. Now, the reason we put it there is because a lot of the content in the movie will come out of that speaker, and virtually all voice conversations are going to come out of that speaker. So it makes you think, again, you're having a dialogue with somebody in front of you. Now, what's the purpose of the sound system? Well, it's just like the video. We want you thinking you're part of the movie. So having it right there in front of you makes you, again, you're thinking you're having a dialogue with somebody in the movie. So that's why we put it where we do. Now, I mentioned a term there, dead on with the main listening position in the room. It's interesting, when they sound check rooms to make it sound as good as we possibly can, the engineers can only make one chair sound good. Not all chairs sound great, and a lot of people don't realize this. And so if you ever go into a higher-end home theater store and that salesman guy kind of tackles you at the door, walks you into that little room he wants you to experience this theater he's going to sell you, does he tell you the entire room's designed to sound the best and look the best sitting in that chair? And many don't. And if you don't do what they did, when you take that thing home and set it up, you're not going to get the same effect that they did inside the store. So be aware of the fact that we can only make one chair sound good. And they call that, by the way, their money chair. Okay? Now, when you look at the other two speakers in the front of the room, the right and left channel up here, you'll find that they're off on a certain angle from that center channel. And that angle is around 22 to 30 degrees. Now, where do these angles come from and why are we putting them there? And if you don't know, in home theater, speaker placement's kind of critical to get this thing to sound the way it's supposed to. And again, reproduce a live sound. So you got to understand, in the 1980s, a bunch of studies were done by these movie guys who are wanting to develop this home theater thing. And again, to be able to recreate a live sound. And in the beginning, sound reproduction was just a single speaker and mono, we refer to it. In the roughly the 50s, we came out with something called stereo, which you got to be standing in between the two speakers in order to get the benefit of that stereo. And it's interesting. There's a whole study called psychoacoustics, which is how we actually hear as humans. And if you're standing in a sweet spot in a stereo setup, you close your eyes, your ears will hear a right and a left channel. Your mind, though, will hear a center channel. It's not there. And so when we wanted to develop a sound system that could recreate all sounds, or pretty close to it, and we can never get perfect, but we're close, a bunch of studies were done in the 80s. So, they did 5, they did 10, they did 20, they did 30 speakers, and they came back and said, you know what? 5 speakers in these positions in a room are going to do a pretty good job of recreating live sounds. And so that's why these angles are important, that you put those speakers where they tell you to. Okay? So there's the ones in the front. Now, the ones in the rear channel is referred to, you'll notice that they're on a side wall, not a back wall, and they're either right on the side of you or they're slightly behind the listening position is what they kind of prefer. And they're never, that's one reason why we never tell you put chairs on a back wall, because we like to put them speakers slightly behind you. Okay, and by the way, the only reason they're there behind you is to create what they call the flower effect in a theater. Now, in a good quality home theater sound system, you will be sitting in your money chair and you'll hear this thing rumbling behind you. And it sounds like it swished over your head and it disappeared over out into that left channel. Well, that only happens if those speakers are behind you, and that's why they're there. Now, if you are not concerned about the flower effect, and you do need to set these chairs along a back wall, you can actually move those two rear channel speakers up to roughly about a 60-degree angle on the side walls from the center channel, about a 60-degree angle on either side, and they'll sound fine. It's just you're going to lose your flower effect in the theater. So a couple things to think about with speaker placement. It's very important that you put the darn speakers where they tell you to, okay? And so make sure they're mounted in the proper locations. And I typically tell people never mount speakers in ceilings. And when you see people putting these speakers in ceilings, you kind of have a rough idea. They don't know a lot about sound reproduction. And I tell people if our ears were on our top of our heads, we'd be putting them in ceilings, but they're not. It's one of the worst places actually to put them. So instead of directing a speaker at somebody, you're kind of pointing it at the ground. So the thing's never going to sound quite like they want it to. And and they normally do it because they're trying to hide speakers. And you know what? There are all kinds of ways of hiding speakers today. They got speakers today. You can mud right over them, and you don't even know it's a speaker until you lay your hand on the wall and you realize the darn walls are vibrating. So there are better ways of hiding them. And in some cases, we spend so much money on these things, the last thing we want to do is hide them. So we mount them on sidewalls or on walls. And the speakers should be mounted at roughly ear height in the room. And if you're sitting in a chair, that's roughly 4 foot off the ground. And we can mount them a little higher, a little lower if we have to, and tone them down or tone them up if you have to. But that's kind of the suggestion. And one of the other key thing about these 5 speakers is that you pull them out of the box and you set them up. Something that's never going to happen unless you adjust it is that all speakers are of the same loudness. They'll be different. And they'll be different based on where they're placed in a room. And for instance, in corners, we typically tell you never put speakers in corners because that wall acts like kind of a megaphone on that speaker. And it's a little louder than if it was out maybe by itself. So adjusting the same loudness on each of the 5 speakers is kind of key because if the speakers in the front are a little loud, the ones in the back, you may not be able to hear what's coming out of those. So we need to set that on all those. So how do you do that? Well, Better quality receivers will have sound pressure level meters built into them, and those are great. I mean, you basically take a microphone, plug it into the receiver, set the mic in the money chair, and hit the button on the receiver, and it will set each of the speakers for you separately, which is nice if you have it. If you don't, you can go down to some shop, Radio Shack or someplace like that, pick yourself up a sound meter for about $50. They're not a whole lot of money here, and you can actually download an app on a cell phone, which really isn't much of a sound meter, but probably better than nothing, I guess. But anyway, what we do is you go home with that sound meter and you crank the receiver up like you want to watch a movie. The receivers allow us to put a test tone on each of the speakers separately. So let's say we put a test tone on the center channel, and it'll be over there making a sound at a constant frequency. And you'll sit then in your money chair, and then with your meter held at ear height, you'll take a reading of that sound at that position. And let's say the reading comes back at, say, 70 dB of sound. Cool. Then we'll put that same test tone on the left channel speaker, go back into our listening position, take another reading with our meter, and you want that to, again, read 70. Now, if it doesn't, you can, through the receiver, raise or lower that one speaker so that it matches the center channel. And then you go through and set all 5 the same. And you know what? Once you've got that done, I think you're going to be surprised at how much better your sound system actually does sound. And that is a kind of key thing to making these things sound like they're supposed to. Right? Now, besides getting those in the right position and making sure they're the right loudness, is to mount this subwoofer someplace in the room. Now, we call it low frequency effects, LFEs, and subwoofers typically take over about 200 hertz and down in frequency. The human hearing range is around 20 to 20,000 hertz, so that low frequency bass, we need a little bit bigger speaker to actually handle that. So that's what the subwoofers come in and give us all that great bass we hear in these movies that we love. And now the suggestion is that subwoofer should go to the front of the room, to the left or right of your main listening position. Now, I've heard all kinds of opinions about subs, and I've had guys tell you that, no, take the low-frequency bass, the subwoofers, and put them in corners and basically bounce that low-frequency wave off a corner. I've had other guys go, no, man, put that subwoofer in the money chair and put a test tone on it so it's going at a constant frequency. And then walk along the perimeter of the walls in the room. And wherever you hear it good, you could flip to 2 locations. And if you're sitting in the money chair and it's over there, you should hear it pretty good. And I was stunned the first time I was really kind of introduced to this kind of stuff years ago. And I took a course lots of years ago, and a teacher put a test tone on a subwoofer in the front of the room. And he said, everybody get out of your chair, start walking around this room. And it was a pretty good sized room. But sure enough, you walked a few feet and you barely heard that darn thing. You walked a handful of feet more and it was loud as heck. So, what's going on? And what the guy was trying to impress upon us was the fact that these low frequency bass waves are very long. And by the way, they can travel just about everything. They're the hardest ones to keep in a room. Have a very long, what we refer to as a wavelength. And so check this out. Here we have a subwoofer here that's going to put out a sound wave, right? And we know sound travels at roughly 1,130 feet a second, okay? Now, let's say we put an 80 hertz sound wave on that subwoofer. So we're going to set a constant frequency at 80 hertz, okay? Constant frequency. Well, we know that sound wave is going to travel that far in 1 second, and it's going to create 80 of these what we call wavelengths, okay? From here to here is one wavelength, okay? Now, and it'll create 80 of those in that 1 second. But what we want to know is how far does it travel just in one wavelength? Well, very simply, you take the distance, divide it by the frequency, and you come up with a number which is about 14 feet. So from here, which is the face of the subwoofer, to right there is roughly 14 feet away from the subwoofer. And the next wavelength would be at an end of 28 feet, any continuation of that. Now, if we look at the half wavelength, which is 7 feet here, and then 21 feet, if you happen to be standing at the what we call the null line, where you're 7 feet, 14 feet, 21 feet, or any variation of that, you will barely hear that subwoofer. If you're standing at where there is a peak, and this is roughly 3.5, and that's roughly 10.5, and any variation of that, you'd actually hear it the loudest. And so be aware of the fact that all rooms will have certain bass frequencies they will have trouble with because essentially the width or the length of the room is the same as this frequency or this wavelength. So it's kind of interesting about low frequency based sound waves. Now, you know the guys with the souped up car stereos, and that thing is just vibrating from all the sound, and you're 50 feet away from this thing going, dude, how can he sit inside that car? Well, you don't realize that that person is sitting actually pretty close to that sound, that source. So they actually don't hear a lot of that sound wave. They feel it, but they may not be. They're actually sitting a little too close to it. So kind of cool stuff, right? So be aware of the subwoofer can technically go about anywhere in the room as long as it kind of sounds good. So with a little experimentation with a solid tone on your subwoofers and sitting in your money chair, you could probably figure what that is. Okay. Now, as far as TVs, components that you might want to hook up things with or you buy or use. 25 years ago, we had no choice. I mean, CRT, that's it. Cathode ray tube, that's it. Today, I don't know how many different types of TVs there are, but they seem like they're bringing out a new one every time I turn around. And so we got the DLPs, the LEDs, the LCDs, the plasmas, the organic LEDs, and how about those new transparent organic LEDs, not to mention the 4K ones that are coming out. So there's lots of choices within TVs, and you can spend actually quite a bit of money on TV if you care to today. But there's a few things you should know about them. And one is that all TVs technically should be tuned for the room they're put in if you're going to get it to look the way it ultimately could. And, they never are. And technically, when they make a TV, they typically will crank brightness and contrast controls and things like that. So when you put them in a bright showroom floor, they actually look pretty good. But you put them in a darkened home theater, they can actually be a little too bright. So in many TVs, by the way, will come with preset color settings for you. You might look into those, and there'll be like a vivid setting and a theater setting and some, brilliant settings or whatever it might be. And one of those might get you close to what you're trying to accomplish in that particular room you're in, because due to the ambient light and things like that, that TV really got to be tuned for that room. And you can do this by simply watching a movie if you'd like care to, some favorite movie. It has some nice color to it. And as you get to certain spots, pause it, and then maybe putz with the colors a little bit. And I'll tell you that to be a little careful with that. But and by the way, if you ever adjust colors in TVs, the idea is to turn the TV on and let it warm up for half hour or an hour. And they tend to settle down before you start putzing with the colors in the TV. Another way of doing this is buy a DVD. That's fairly inexpensive, $20 or less. You can throw into a DVD player. It'll put test colors and patterns on screen, and they'll give you like a red film to set the red color, and a green to set the green, and a blue film to set the blue color. And those are the primary colors we set in a TV. And actually, the human eye is actually pretty good at setting colors. And we also set the white and the black levels in a TV. And a Pro, though, is going to pull out a piece of test equipment that we can actually put test patterns on that screen, because the DVD thing and the DVD player set the TV to the DVD player, not some other source, like a set-top box or something. So a Pro is going to pull out a piece of test equipment that we can put a test pattern on the screen, and again, set all these primary colors, and again, the black and the white levels. And when they set colors in TVs, we do that utilizing what's called the Kelvin temperature range. If you don't know, all colors have a certain Kelvin range that corresponds to that. So if we put a meter on this gal's dress, and that meter comes back and it says 6,000 degrees Kelvin, you're pure white, and it ain't some variation of a white. Now, these little meters can get kind of expensive, but that's what Pro is going to do. And you know what? They make a fine living out of doing just resetting colors and audio in these home theaters, because they tend to come out of whack over time. Okay? Now, that's a little bit about the room, a little bit about maybe a TV you might think about as you go to put one in a room. And then we look at the cabling we're going to hook it all up with. And I'm not going to cover speaker wire. I'm going to hold that off on another one. But I'm going to talk real briefly about component, composite, S-video, and of course the new one, which is HDMI, that we're all supposed to be utilizing. Now, if you have not heard of what's called of the analog sunset, it's actually already set as of last year. And what we're trying to do here is that as in '98, this gets signed into law. Okay, so it's a long time coming. But as of last year, if you want to make a device that puts out high def video, and you want to be able to sell that worldwide, that high def video can only go through the HDMI inputs and outputs on the devices. Okay, we can no longer put high def video out of some other device like component video. And, the holy grail today still is 1080p. We can get that out of component video cable. We don't need HDMI. Always had to pull separate audio, but that's not a big problem. Well, going forward, if you're going to go HDMI or if you're going to get a high def output, you got to put it through HDMI. And so be aware that we're all being forced into this. So component, composite, everything else is kind of slowly fading away, and we're all going to HDMI. Now that stands for a high definition multimedia interface is what it stands for. I would encourage you to go check out hdmi.org sometime and do a little research into HDMI. And what you'll find is that we've actually gone through several variations of it since the beginning. And when HDMI really gets its start in the industry, and I'd go to the trade shows and you talk to folks and find out what they knew about HDMI, and technicians typically kind of hated it, and they hated it because of some problems we have with it. And today they love it, and I'll explain why in a minute. But the reason they hated it in the past was that when 1.1 versions, and a lot of people don't know there's 4 versions of HDMI, cables and connectivity. And a lot of it had to do more with the connectivity than the cabling per se, but again, the cables were ready for this kind of stuff too. So 1.1 comes out in the beginning, and it does not do audio. It only does the video kind of stuff. And then 1.2 added audio and video. 1.3 comes out and adds like 18 different little features a manufacturer can add to that system. And not all manufacturers used all the features. And 1.4 added Ethernet capabilities to the cabling, so we could, again, the devices, so we could turn the TV into a computer screen. Okay. Well, when you went out and bought equipment, the idea was have equipment with all the same version of HDMI in it. Now they're all backward compatible, but excuse me, you might have a TV like that's 1.3 compatible, but a set-top box is only 1.2. So obviously, there's things the TV can do that the set-top box can't. So when you went out and bought equipment and you bought a TV or something like that, the salesman on the floor goes, "Oh, hey, you got 3 HDMI inputs on the back of that TV." Turn around and ask the salesman, "What version of HDMI is it?" And they would go, "Hey, dude, it's HDMI. I don't know what are you talking about." They don't even know there's 4 versions of it, okay? And again, your cabling was ready for this too, and so very seldom was it blatantly stated. So that was a little bit of a problem. Now, as of September of last year, 2.0 comes out. Now, and 2.0, it's interesting. They doubled the bandwidth pretty much, and they did it by changing the encoding schemes that they're utilizing on either end. So it's the electronics that are different, really not the cabling. So as 2.0's come out, it's the same cable, okay? And it's designed to support the next resolution coming out to us, which is 4K. Which, if you haven't heard about that, that's going to be 4 times the resolution of your 1080p TVs. And these things are not cheap yet, but it gets us out to 18 gigabits of speed to support that 4K resolution video. Now, what's interesting about this is the HDMI people are not allowing people who make equipment that uses 2.0 HDMI connectors and stuff in it, because with 2.0, there's all these other features that could be added to this device if the manufacturer chooses to add that feature. And since not all manufacturers use all these features, that's why they don't want you using the term 2.0, because that's kind of misleading. They're telling us we need to look at the features of this equipment and make sure that those same features are incorporated in this other device we want to make talk to that source material. So be aware of you're looking for features, not these numbers anymore. So when you go out and look for HDMI stuff, what you're going to basically find are 2 variations as far as the cabling is concerned, and even into the connectivity. What we call high speed or standard. And so within the standard group of product, they've got just a standard, they've got an Ethernet version of it, which again turns the TV into a computer screen, and an automotive. And in the high speed, we have again the high speed and a version with Ethernet. Okay. Now, again, what's the difference between these? Again, the HDMI standard stuff is only going to get us up to 1080i. Performance is not going to get us up to 1080p. We have to go to that 1080 high-speed stuff to get us up to the 1080p formatted videos and things like that. So that's the main difference between the two. Okay. Now, some cool things go on within HDMI that's never happened in the past, and some of those cool things that goes on is what we refer to as handshake between the devices. So the two devices today technically are talking to each other, so they never did that with component or composite or some other format. And so as these two things start talking, there's these encrypted keys, and there's several layers. They have to basically fall into place before this source device is going to release content to this display device. So all these encrypted keys have to kind of fall into place. And that's kind of cool in a way, because now the DVD player can tell Mr. 1080p TV that, hey, you're going to get a 480p formatted movie, and it kind of knows what to do with it. And they can actually encode information on things like Blu-ray discs that will say, hey, if you see certain things, don't talk to it. And so each device will be, again, talking to each other. And this handshaking, when these two things don't start talking together correctly, because, again, they're not all the same version of HDMI, so to speak, that's all of a sudden when all the content's not getting released for some reason, or you're getting the audio but not the video, or the video but not the audio, and all these little problems start arising within HDMI connectivity, okay, and what's going on in between the two devices. So now, the real reason you've been sold HDMI and Blu-ray devices, if you don't know, is something called high bandwidth digital copy or content protection, and a lot of people call it high definition copy protection, or HDCP. So with Blu-ray and HDMI and all this communicating that's going on, we can actually encode, as I said a second ago, information on devices like Blu-ray discs and things like that that will say, hey, you see certain things, don't talk to it. And you got to understand what's going on with the industry is, copyright laws are very important, and these folks deserve to get paid. And when you make a copy of something illegally, you know what? They don't get paid. And they obviously want to try and protect their content. Now, back in the 1980s, when everything's on VCR tape, these folks were somewhat protected. Because with a VCR, if I hand you a copy of a video I made, and then you make a copy and hand a copy of that to somebody, and then they make a copy and hand it to somebody, by the time that thing gets copied, a few times, it's getting to a point the resolution's getting bad enough, you may not actually want to watch the video. Now, when DVD comes out in the 90s, that's digital, and you can make a copy of a copy of a copy, and the last one looks as good as the first one. And shortly after the DVD players come out, DVD burners come out, and you know what? We can easily make copies of all this content that's been put out on DVD. Now, so we want to protect ourselves this time around, and this is why we got Blu-ray, okay? And by the way, when you make copies of stuff out there, folks, if you don't know it, that's like a $100,000 finable offense for every copy you make. So don't get in the habit of that. And I always love the younger generation that copies those MP3 files and hand them to people. And watch out, you can get in trouble for doing that kind of thing. And so today, the Blu-ray player and HDMI and the ability to talk back and forth, we can protect our content. And again, as I said a minute ago, when we see certain things we don't want to see, they can actually stop releasing the content to that device out there. So this is why you're being sold HDMI. And, and I wish that's what they would tell you versus the fact that, oh, it's a great experience for you, Mr. Customer, as far as your audio and video is concerned. It's actually a pretty good thing for them. And, no installer ever dreamt up this little connector that we utilize here. And if you ever cut an HDMI cable in half, which nobody does because they spend good money on these things, there's 19 little wires in those cables today. And so that's not something you're going to easily think about field terminating. And not to mention, it's a bulky cable, it's hard to pull behind walls and things like that. So, yeah, no installer ever dreamt up this kind of connector. And it's kind of funny, when I go to the trade shows today, I find the technicians are absolutely love HDMI. And you know why they love HDMI? Is because today, if customers are having issues with getting these devices all to work together, not many homeowners are going to sit down and figure out what's going on with this encoding scheme, and they don't have a tool to actually test it either. And today, when I go to these HDMI troubleshooting courses, they're absolutely packed. And they're selling some testers, and look at Quantum Data as a manufactured test equipment for that, and that are a couple $3,000 in price. But now we can actually look at that waveform, that HDMI signal, and actually start deciphering what possibly could be going wrong with it. And so the one on the left here is an example of what we refer to as a good eye pattern, and the one on the right is considered to be a bad eye pattern. And so they can start disagreeing with what might be potentially wrong with these HDMI signals. So people just absolutely love it. And some other issues you'll run across today, or as far as technicians, they absolutely love it, I should say. is that, usually 50 feet or less is the limit on the cabling. We go a little longer, usually with bigger conductor cables, but usually kind of somewhere under 50 feet. It seems to work all right. Longer runs than that, we normally convert to some other type of cabling, and either could be fiber, but a lot of times it's 5E or maybe Cat 6, utilizing what's referred to as a media converter. Although these can add issues to that whole signaling thing, and this whole signaling thing is another reason why HDMI doesn't like to get split. Where old component video, you could split it multiple times. Look into a new way of doing things, and it's not really new, it's been around in a number of years, called HDBaseT, and you might look into it. And I saw a demo at a trade show, I don't know, 4, maybe 5 years ago, and they had 100 meters of Cat 6 cable, and they were providing 1080p video out to 100 meters across Category 6 out to a TV, and they were actually putting 48 volts DC down one of those pairs too, and they had an AC to DC converter underneath the TV, and they can actually drive that TV with that Category 6 cable as well, which I thought was really cool. So look into it. And then if you have not heard about 802.11 AC wireless systems, that's new as of last year too. And that provides us with gigabit wireless speeds. And streaming high-def video requires roughly a gig of bandwidth. And if we could all do this wirelessly, where I have to send the wires, I tell you what, that might really be a game changer moving forward as we get into future versions of home theater systems. So anyway, that's a lot of little things that you might think about with home theaters. You can find all kinds of little outlet boxes and low voltage boxes. We might want maybe low and one high here to run cabling behind walls we want to. They even have these with power modules in them, so you can mount all that behind the TV and mount the TV right on the wall in the face of that. You'll find all kinds of TV mounts out there today, which we normally are mounting to a wall, but not always. You don't see as many TVs on pedestals as you want to, and again, there's all kinds of wire mounts out there. But again, those are all little things you might think about, what type of room you want to use, the carpeting, the home theater chairs, and I'm telling you, this can get into a deep subject depending on how much money you really want to spend. But with those tips, hopefully you'll be a little bit more armed when you go to tackle that next little home theater project you're thinking of. And again, folks, I appreciate you watching the channel. I really do appreciate you all subscribing to that channel. Again, I'm Ron, and I'll plan on seeing you on the next one.